Hi, everyone. My name is Lana Allman, and I will be talking about executive action on immigration. If you reach below your seat, you'll find a sticky note. Some of you might have fallen off for some of you. If it says undocumented immigrant, please stand up. Thank you. So I'm going to hang out here for a second. So executive action on immigration may impact as many as 5 million people, both parents and children that may have been facing the risk of being deported. This presentation talks about social media and mobility as possible tools for making implementation more successful. I want to start off by talking about why immigration is so important to me. On December 22nd, 1990, my family and I came to the US from the USSR as refugees. With $600 and a few words of English, my parents took the bold move of bringing us, my sister and I, to the US for a better future. We came thanks to the Jackson-Vanik legislation, which allowed millions of Jewish immigrants from the former Soviet Union to come to the US by removing sanctions, economic sanctions from former Soviet republics to let the Jewish people out because of religious persecution. We came as refugees, which meant that we had to abandon our own citizenship, and even if we wanted to go back, we couldn't. For 5 years, we had a refugee status and later became green card holders or permanent legal residents, and then at the 10-year mark became naturalized US citizens and passport holders. Immigration became my true passion. I wanted to know everything that there was about it. I wanted to know where my papers came from, so I interned for the Immigration Naturalization Service, and I learned Spanish and learned where other people come from to the US. So I lived in Latin America and worked with migrants there. With Booz Allen, I worked on the southwest border and conducted interviews in the US and in Mexico to learn more about child and immigrant smuggling and drug trafficking. Just over a year ago, with the design thinking team, we went to Arizona to reverse walk some of the trails that migrants take to come here. We found water jugs with prayers on them, as well as special shoes that people make to hide their footprints from law enforcement. Unlike my family, who was very fortunate to have a legal path, millions of people do not have this. They risk their lives on a daily basis to come to the US to live here. And remember Carlos, that's him separated from his mother on the other side of the fence. He'll come back later in the presentation. On November 20th, 2014, President Obama passed Executive Action on Immigration, which would extend the deferred action for childhood arrivals or put in place the deferred action for parents of American citizens and green card holders. So for those of you that had an undocumented ticket, half of you could now have a status. Executive action grants a Social Security as well as work authorization so that immigrants could contribute to the economy without having to hide in the shadows from the government. There are numerous challenges that go along with implementing such a large-scale program. There's issues with immigration fraud. There's data management issues. There is the trust in the government from people that have lived in the shadows and feared it for so long, as well as political and legal battles, just like the one that took place several days ago that put a pause on DACA by a Texas judge. It's currently being appealed. So what if we use social media and mobility to think of as key tools to make implementation of executive action more successful? With social media, we can do better outreach, we can interact with the public and create trust between the public and the government. Currently, the USCIS, or Immigration Services, has a blog called The Beacon, as well as a Facebook account with thousands of posts, but no replies. And so if the USCIS were to reply to some of these questions, we could start to build a trust between the government. USCIS also has a designated YouTube channel, as well as a Twitter account, but those are used like bulletin boards to push information rather than to interact with the government and the people. So again, these could be perfect outreach mechanisms. The government also warns immigrants about numerous immigration scams, but there's not an easy mechanism for immigrants to report this activity. So if there would be a mobile app that immigrants could use to report fraudulent immigration service providers, this would help them to serve as the ears and eyes of the government. Also, there are a number of mobile apps currently that supposedly help to track an immigrant's application process by a mobile device, but none of them are backed by the USCIS, which lend themselves to additional scams and identity theft. So if USCIS would have its own app, it would make it better and easier. So if we use social media and mobility, we can build trust between the government and the public. We could connect the the generation of children migrants and their parents. We could also improve processes. And finally, we can make the trust even stronger. So let's dream big. Remember Carlos? That's Carlos sitting next to me at the Mexican Cultural Institute giving a talk on child migration. He works with United We Dream and is a really big leader in the migrant community. And to quote a fellow immigrant and former refugee from the former Soviet Union, Sergey Brin, co-founder of Google, solving big problems is easier than solving little problems, and immigration is one of these very big problems. So if we rethink the way we approach it, we can make executive action implementation more successful and user-friendly. Thank you very much.
Great job, Lana. Any questions
Thank you.
for Lana?
Sure. So there are studies on the Hispanic immigrant or Spanish-speaking populations that use mobile devices, but it's difficult to gauge because there's 11.3 million supposedly undocumented. But it's suspected that much more people use mobile devices than computers and laptops, so that's why it would be more effective. I don't have an exact number of who's mobile. Good question. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if there is a legal way, people definitely take it rather than coming here undocumented. But what we did a really interesting study with the SIG on the DACA process when it just came into action. What we found out is that immigrants form their own communities online to answer each other's questions because there's that silence within the government on social media. And so, yes, if the government would really take advantage of these tools, they could improve how immigrants, they could first of all control misinformation that's out there, and they could also dialogue with immigrants to really explain how things work. So yes, absolutely, yeah. So I haven't thought about self-funding, but the more, so USCIS is a fee-based agency. They live on these fees that people pay for applications. If more people were to apply, maybe they could possibly lower the fees, and by using social media to get the message out there and to make people less fearful of the government, they could possibly consider that kind of the benefits of having a larger application pool. So that could be an option to lower the fees. Thank you.
Great job.